Our first lesson this morning comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40. It is often referred to as 2nd Isaiah. It was a word of hope in a time of disruption and suffering and exile. Hear now these words. To whom then will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see, who created these? He who brings out their host and numbers them, calling them all by name. Because he is great in strength, mighty in power, not one is missing. May God add his blessing to the hearing and the reading of this word. And if you would please stand for the gospel reading. Reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, Jesus is on the way to Jerusalem, and we hear this familiar story. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So I'm very quick most often to tell you that God always moves before us. And that one of the ways that that's affirmed to me is that we plan these services far in advance, and that I plan my scriptures and my sermon titles far in advance, and it always amazes me how they seem to fit, except when they don't. And so if I'm honest about the times that they fit and it's all a God thing, I have to be honest about the times, let's just say, they don't. And this was one of those weeks, because the sermon title was supposed to be for this week, "Stick a Fork in It, It's Done." If you were here, you would laugh. And so I'm hearing you all laugh. Because we've been in this Lenten journey doing a sermon series on friendship. And a piece of that, honestly, is that there are times when our friendships don't last forever. A time when one or two or another or three or four or other things happen, and either by attrition or by proactive response, we choose to let friendships go. And sometimes that's the best thing to do. But I didn't think talking about what it means to let go of friendship really was what I wanted to preach about this morning in the midst of the context that we have. And besides, one of the scriptures was from Job. And if you all know much about Job, you know he had 3 friends, quote unquote, who came to him and told him he needed to confess even if he didn't know what he'd done wrong, because clearly God didn't like him anymore. And I didn't think that's what we needed to hear either. So I just wanted to be upfront with you that I purposely changed the scriptures and the sermon title because I think we do need strength for the day. I do think we need the kind of hope that God brought to the people in Isaiah's time. That Pastor Cheryl read, a kind of hope that came to a people that were probably nearing the end of their exile, but they had been so defeated that understanding that coming home was a possibility didn't mean that it was going to be easy, and that the home that they were going to come to was not going to be the same as the home that was left. And so a part of what I have heard myself saying, as well as folks that I have talked to in the last couple of weeks, has been that nothing will ever be the same again. We won't do things the same way again. And there is both grief to that as well as hope. There's both a nostalgia that begins to build from the way things used to be, but there is also the possibility of the way things can be. Because what I know about myself, and perhaps the human condition, is that most of the time, unless we are forced to step back, unless we are mandated to take a breath and to pause, we don't. And it seems as if this is one of those times. I was driving to church this morning, and the roads were not quite as busy as they normally are. And I wondered to myself, I wonder what people are doing. I know that this last week is when they've decided that most of the schools aren't going to meet in session in person for the rest of the year. And I've heard and seen on Facebook, teachers are mourning that. Students are mourning that. And parents are trying to figure out what to do and how best to do it and how best to offer comfort and support and encouragement. And that's why we wanted Mona and Stacy to be a part of our service this morning to say that you're not alone and that we're sort of building the road as we're walking on it. But that's much of what the scriptures are about. Much of what faith is about is building the road as we walk on it. And so these words from Isaiah that really start out in verse 21. I did not have Pastor Cheryl read all of those verses, but it starts out with rhetorical questions. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. And one of the commentators I read said, if we look at those as rhetorical questions, what we can do with that is to say, surely you have known. Surely you have heard. Surely from the foundations of the earth, you know that God is the creator of all that is. And second Isaiah uses, in terms of the word creator or create, the word bere, which is translated into power. And it's the only word it's only used as a word for create in this scripture and in Genesis 1, verses 14 to 16. And in the scriptures that Cheryl read for us this morning, what it referred to was that God is also the creator of the heavens, and that not one star is lost to God. That's important for us to hear. We are not lost to God. And that unlike the god Marduk and the astral gods of the Egyptians, so that the stars in the heavens were gods in and of themselves, what the second Isaiah makes clear and what the author of Genesis makes clear is that there are no other gods besides the creator God. So our creator God is the creator of those heavens and stars. They are not gods in and of themselves. A virus is not a god. We're reacting to a virus. We're responding to a virus. It has changed the way that we interact with one another. It's changed the way we worship, but it hasn't stopped us. And it hasn't stopped God in being in relationship with us. It hasn't stopped God being creative in us and inviting us to allow that creativity to work in us, even in what seem the most dire circumstances. What I want us to hear is that God has been God of all of history, and there have been other times when human beings have been in difficult circumstances and difficult situations, times when people questioned whether God was still relevant anymore. Well, we were questioning that before the virus occurred. We're struggling with that as a church before the virus occurred. And we have the same challenge that these people of God in Isaiah's time has. And that challenge is to trust. Is to trust the relevancy of a creator who saw enough beauty that the sun came into being. Who saw enough beauty that sun not only came into being, but it rises each morning. And it looks different each morning that it rises. And it sets each evening. And it looks different every evening that it sets. Now, I will tell you very honestly that my prayers have been that God at least give us the benefit of the doubt and give us some blue sky and sunshine. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe the sun is still there. And that there are still places where it's rising with pinks and blues and purples and setting with just the same, and that we will see that again ourselves. The prophet Isaiah says not one star, not one heavenly body is lost to God. If that's the case, neither is any one of us lost to God in this most difficult time. Not even Martha. Oh yes, there's that story of Mary and Martha. That story that perhaps we like to reduce down to the younger sister being the favorite. Hi, Belinda. And the older sister not. But that's not what it's about, and we know that. In fact, what if we looked at this not as a story of comparison, but a story of completion? Well, what if we looked at it not as a story of who's better, but when is better? Not a story of what is better, but why is better. If we reframe it, if we step back, if we perhaps have a different perspective. Friends, if there's nothing else that's happening right now by sheltering at home, if there's nothing else that's happening right now than seeing the world in a way we have never seen it before, it's inviting us to have a different perspective. Jesus is not in this story saying that youngest children are the favorite, although that will continue to be the way I want to interpret it when I'm feeling that way. But legitimately and faithfully, it's not what this story is about. The story is about Jesus inviting both of these women, radical enough in its day, inviting both of these women at this time to understand that they are as accepted as disciples who can sit at the feet of Jesus and listen to Jesus' teaching as all of the male disciples are. We know enough about Jesus to know that he's not saying that what Martha is doing isn't important, because we've just, in the chapter before, dealt with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is about going and doing. And the story of Mary and Martha is about sitting and listening. So it's not either or for Jesus. It's both and. It's a story of completion. Jesus will live out both of these things. And he will live them out with men and women. And he will live them out with lepers and with the able-bodied. And he will live them out with those who have demons, and he will live them out with those who don't. He will live them out with those who are bent over or hemorrhaging and have withered hands and drop feet, and he will live it out with the wealthy and the able-bodied and those who the world deems as a success. He will live it out with the Roman Empire, and he will live it out with the Jewish chosen, and he will live it out with the Gentiles who've never been invited. He will live out both and, going and doing and sitting and listening. He will live that out in ways that, as the book I read from earlier says, he will live it out in ways that we can get our arms around, so that we can begin to understand what kind of a God we have. And it's that God who seeks to be in relationship with us in all times, in all places, throughout the course of history. And perhaps that's strength for this day. It's the knowledge and the trust that Jesus still has good things to say. And perhaps in these moments in history, he most wants us to sit and listen. Get your Bibles out. There are great stories in there. Go to the parable of the prodigal son in Luke. Go to the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke. Go to the story of the bent over woman and her healing in Luke. Are you kind of getting the impression that right now I'm directing you to the Gospel of Luke? Because Luke was thought to have been a physician, a healer. By the way, that didn't occur to me until this week. Now, I've been following the Gospel of Luke in my preaching since January. But isn't it interesting that given what's going on in today's world, in today's context, in today's society, that this week is when it reoccurred to me that Luke was a physician. Maybe, Pastor Nanette, that's why Luke feels comforting right now. Maybe it's a reminder that God has never left God's people without healers, physical and spiritual and emotional. And we are called to be that as well, with and for one another. I've been in ministry a long time, but I've never lived through times like this. The world was different after September 11th, and the world is different now. And I like to believe that I've been around so long that I can deal with things with equanimity on a continuous basis. None of you laugh. None of you laugh. They're laughing because, for the same reason you all out there are laughing, you know me better than that. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm not a crier, but I've cried in the last couple of days for the first time in a long time. I don't usually let stress control me in groups of people so that my anger shows. But I did today, or this week anyway. And I find myself reflecting on that and praying about it. And do you know what I hear? I don't hear a God saying, Reverend Dr. Roberts, you know better than that. How long have you been in training? What I hear God say is, you know, Nanette, there's grace for you too. But watch it. No, I don't hear that part. But if you need to hear it, there's grace for you too, moms and dads. There's grace for you too, supervisors who may be having to lay off employees you know are going to struggle financially. There's grace for you too, those who need to ask for help perhaps for the first time, for food or clothes or somebody to run to the pharmacy for you. There's grace for you too, those of you who feel as if this really isn't affecting you because you don't believe it really, that it's going to be any big deal. There's grace for medical workers who have to turn people away at nursing homes, even families, because they're not allowed in to see their loved ones. There's grace, friends, there's grace. There's grace for us. There was grace for God's people who didn't really believe that coming back home from exile was going to be all that comforting. There was grace for Martha, who said to Jesus, can't you make my sister get up and help me? And there was grace for Mary, sitting at the feet of Jesus, knowing her sister was angry with her, but still feeling like what she needed to do in that moment was just to sit and to listen. So friends, give each other grace in these most difficult days. Share that grace in your neighborhood, in your homes. Share that grace with your educators. And educators will share that with your families. Share it with your pastors. And know that we want to share that with you. And as we move as God's people continually through this Lenten journey, God is growing us. I have no doubt about that. And in that growth, we will see new things. We will hear new things. We will experience new things. Not all of them will be optimistic and great, but not all of them are going to be depressing and bad. So we have to open ourselves to all of it. That's easier done together than separately. So use those social media platforms. You use those smartphones to call. Use the snail mail. Just spray stuff down before you bring it in your house. And don't doubt. And when you do, call us and we'll give you strength. Don't doubt that God's presence and God's love and God's grace lives with each of us. So may it be. Amen.
Thanks for watching. If you would like to donate to the church, click the link below. For service times, campus locations, and any other info, you can visit graceumc.church.